Hi, good morning, students. So, I wanted to revise and recollect what we did in the yesterday's class. So, yesterday we discussed about the research problem, the definition of the research problem, and the importance of identification of research problem in the research process, and also the what are the various techniques which are being used to identify the research problem. And also I told you that the literature review is one of the most important technique or the tool which is being extensively used by every researcher across the globe. Okay, and that literature review, okay, the minimum 100 to 150 journal papers have to be collected in the domain which we identified for research problem, and we need to study them and we need to write them. So these are all the things we extensively discussed in the previous class. So today we'll discuss the research design. There's the next step after the research once we decide the research problem. Well, once we define the research problem based on using all the tools and techniques for identification of the research problem, immediately we need to define, okay, the literature gap. And after the literature we need to define first literature gap, then research problem. Okay. Then comes to the research objectives. Okay, the immediately after we identify the gap in the literature, we need to immediately define the problem statements. We call it as a research problem, or we call it the research problem statements. In many cases, in many journals, in many research theses, we call it the research statements, problem statements of the research. Once we define the problem statements or the research problem in detail, okay, and research problems, as already discussed, that they are the issues in the present system or the present society or in the industry or in the business. Okay, it may be with the individual or it may be with the group. After that, we need to define our research objectives, what we wanted to carry out, at what we should do it to solve the problem. Those are all called the research objectives. Usually for the research thesis or the doctoral studies, we need to define maximum 3 to 5 research objectives. 3 to 5 research objectives. Okay, immediately after the research problem identification. Once we define the research objectives, the next important stage is the research design. Okay, the next important stage is research design. What do you mean by research design? The research design is nothing but it is the decision making process about the research resources and time. Okay, the research design is a decision making process about the research resources and the time which involves for completing the research. The next, the research design is also called as conceptual framework. It's also called as conceptual framework, or also it's also called as a structure of the research process. Okay, it is the conceptual framework or the structure of the research process. And also the research design can also be defined as it is the outline of the research process. It is the outline of the research process. Okay, then sir, what do you mean by all these three definitions? Okay, the research resources, we call it as, that might be with respect to the availability of the experts, human resources, or to conduct some experiments, or to conduct some tests. We need human resources in the research institutes or in the industry, and also we need equipments for experimentation, and equipments are required for testing, and some equipments are required for gathering the information, and some equipments and software required for analysis. Okay, then these are all the equipment resources, or we call it as a machinery resource. Then the third, we need materials, raw materials for the specimen preparation, or we require some of the materials for testing. Okay, so these are all the material resources. And also we need money. Okay, we need to buy the equipments, we need to buy the materials. Okay, we need to buy a lot of journals. Okay, these are all called as resources. How many resources for our research study are required? What is the cost? What is the budget? All these things are to be clearly defined in the research design process. Okay, so then this design process involves, okay, the first point, what is the study about? That should be very clear. What is the study about? The next, why is the study being made? Also we should know the purpose of the study. Okay, then third, where will be the study carried out? Whether the study will be carried out in the industry, whether the study will be carried out in the institute, whether the study will be carried out in a particular institute where the lab exists. Okay, so like this we need to identify where this experimentation has to be carried out, or whether the study is to be carried out in the field. So like this. Then what type of the data is required, and also the type of the data. Okay, we'll be discussing in the next subsequent chapters the various types of data which are to be collected for the research study. Where can be required data can be found, and also we should know that where this data will be available, whether this data will be available in the market, whether the data is to be collected from the equipments, whether the data is to be collected from the testing equipments. So like this, or whether the data is already available in the published literature, or whether the data is available in the government websites, whether the data is available in the Research Indian Statistical Institute servers. So we need to identify where these data are available. Okay, and what period of time will the study includes? How much time is required for each and every step of the research process? That is to be estimated. What will be the sample design? What techniques of data collection will be used? How will the data being analyzed? What are the formats of data collection? What are the softwares are to be used for data analysis? What type of results we are expecting out of the data which have been collected? And what style will the report should be prepared? Okay, so all these questions should be addressed in the research design. Keeping these research questions or the research decision processes, okay, we need to see that the research design should contain these following parts. The first one, the sampling design. Okay, the research design should include the sampling design procedure. Okay, this deals with the method of selecting the items to be observed for a given study. That is called as sampling design. And the second item to be included in the research design process is observational design, okay, that relates to the conditions under which the observations are to be made, in what conditions the observations or the data are to be collected, that should be there in the research design. Third, statistical design, in which how many items are to be observed, that is called as the sample size. Okay, all the research study by using the statistical tools and the statistical formulas, we need to decide about the number of observations to be made to carry out our research study. Okay, we should minimum the sample observations have to be done. So this is to be calculated depending upon the confidence level and the accuracy of the research study. Okay, with other statistical inputs, we need to calculate how many number of observations are required for our research study. That is called as statistical design. The fourth one is operational design. So this deals with the techniques by which the procedures specified in the sampling, statistical and observational design to be carried out. So these four items have to be reflected in the research design. Then, now, what are the important features of the research design? The first one, the plan must specify the sources and the types of information relevant to the research problem. Second, it is a strategy specifying which approach will be used for gathering and analyzing the data. Third one, it also includes the time and budgets, since they are most important for the studies under consideration, and also the constraints and limitations for the research. So these three things have to be included in the research design. Okay. Then, what is the need of the research design? Okay, you have to note down the point. What is the need of the research design? So while going through this video, you need to pause the video and you need to prepare the notes by yourself. Understand? I don't give any notes. You must pause the video and you have to write down the points. Okay. Then now I am discussing about the need for research design. Well, a research design is needed because it facilitates the smooth sailing of the various research operations, thereby making the research as efficient as possible and yielding maximal information with minimal expenditure of the effort, time and money. Okay, I repeat once again, the need for the research design, why we need to do all these exercise, because okay, it facilitates the smooth sailing of the research operations. First point is, it helps for very smooth going in our research process without any difficulty if we have a good research design features, or we have good design aspects have been considered before we start our research work. Okay. Then it will be efficient, and it is efficient and it yields maximal information. It is time efficient, budget efficient, and yields more information with minimal usage of all the research resources. That is the need of the research design. Okay. Then, what are the features of good research design? Okay. The research design should include the means of obtaining the information. Okay, means how we need to get the information, where information is available, how the information is being collected. That is the means of obtaining the information. But these are all the good features of the good design, good research design. When we call a research design is good, it should have certain properties and characteristics. Those are all called as the features of the good design. The first feature is that the means of obtaining the information we should have in the research design. Then second, the availability and skills of the researcher and his staff. Okay, the availability of the skills. What type of skills I should possess, what type of experience I should have, what type of knowledge I should have before I start my research work. Okay, unless until I have rich domain knowledge about my research and also about my staff. Okay, so where I need to expect some testing or the conducting the experiment or conducting the testing, I need some supporting help from the staff, how well they are equipped with all the equipment's performance. So that is the second point to be considered. A good research design should have all these things clear with the mind. The third, the objective of the problem to be studied should be there clearly. The nature of the problem to be studied, whether the nature of the problem is nothing but whether the problem is solved by the experimental on the machines, whether the problem is thought to be go to the market and study, whether the problem is to be go to the other business and study. So like this, what is the nature of the problem to be studied? And availability of the time and the money for the research. Do you have sufficient money in the hand for the resources to purchase? Maybe material purchase, maybe equipment purchase. Is the time sufficiently available for all my research process? All these things should be included in the research design. So then only the research design is called as a good research design. Okay. Then, so if you know all these things, important items or the points about the research design, then we need to understand certain concepts, certain important concepts that relates to the research design. Okay, note down one by one. There are 8 to 10 research concepts before we carry out the research study or research design study. So the first research design concept is dependent and independent variables. When you go for collecting the data, whether experimental data or whether data is to be collected in the industry, on the equipment or on the people or in the business any operations or in the population, okay, like whatever it is. So the data, the variables will be there. Okay, variables are nothing but the values. Okay, so the dependent variables and there are independent variables. So independent variable is one which does not depend on any other factors. That is called as independent variable. It changes itself. That is called as the independent variable. Then dependent variable. So these dependent variables are the values they depend upon the other variables. Okay, if any other variable changes, automatically it gets changes because this variable is dependent on the other variables. So independent variable, it does not get affected if anything changes on the other side. That is called as independent variable. So then in this we have continuous variables and discontinuous variables or discrete variables. Continuous variables are those variables, these values are with the decimal values. They are called as continuous variables. And discontinuous variables are those, the values are very discrete or they occupy the integer values. So the whatever the data or the whatever the variables in the research, we need to identify whether the variables are dependent, whether the variables are independent, whether the variables are continuous, whether the variables are discrete. So all these things have to be, a researcher should know the knowledge about the variables in the system. Then comes to the extraneous variable. It's an independent variable that are not related to the purpose of the study but may affect the dependent variable are termed as extraneous variables. Okay, these extraneous variables are not related to the purpose of the study, but these variables will affect the dependent variable, not independent variable. It affects the dependent variable of the system. Those variables are called as extraneous variable. Okay, say for example, consider a researcher wants to test the hypothesis. Okay, he wanted to establish the relationship between children's gain and the social studies achievement. Okay, and there with the self concepts. Okay, these are the two variables, that is social studies achievement and the self concepts. These are the two variables. In this, the self concept is called as an independent variable and the social studies achievement is called as a dependent variable. So the intelligence may also will affect the social studies achievement of individual. Okay, the intelligent we are not considered as a variable in this hypothesis testing. We have considered only two things, the two variables, that is the self concept is the one variable and the social study achievement is the another variable. Okay, so the self concept is the independent variable and social studies achievement is the dependent variable. So the intelligent will affect the social studies achievement of an individual. The individual intelligence will affect the achievement of the subject. So that intelligent we are not considered for the analysis. That's why the intelligent is called as an extraneous variable. Okay, then third, control. One of the important characteristics of the good research design is to minimize the influence or the effect of extraneous variable. Okay, so when we are establishing the relation between two variables, that is one independent variable and dependent variable, which I explained now, there are only two variables. We are establishing the relation between these two. If any third extraneous variable, if affects one of these two variables, then my purpose of this study will fail. That's why we need to control, we need to minimize the effect of these extraneous variable. Okay, is called as controlling of the controlling. Okay, then fourth step, confounded relationship. Confounded relationship is nothing but the dependent variable is not free from the influence of the extraneous variable. Okay, so as you know that the extraneous variable will affect the dependent variable if the influence is not controllable. If the influence is not controllable, then the relationship between dependent and independent variable is said to be confounded by the extraneous variable. When we do not have control of this extraneous variable affecting on the dependent variable, then we call the relationship is confounded. Then research hypothesis, I already discussed. The hypothesis testing is establishing the relationship between two variables is known as hypothesis testing. Okay, then experimental and non-experimental testing of research. When the purpose of the research is to test the research hypothesis, and it is termed as hypothesis testing of the research, and it can be experimental design or non-experimental design. Okay, the research in which the independent variable is manipulated. If the independent variable is manipulated in the research, then it is termed as experimental hypothesis testing research. And the research in which the independent variable is not manipulated is called as non-experimental hypothesis testing research. You note on these important points, okay, the facet, and tell when it is called as the experimental and when it is called as non-experimental testing of research. Understand? Then come to the seventh step, okay, the experimental and control groups. In the experimental hypothesis testing research, when the group is exposed to usual conditions, when group is exposed to usual condition, it is termed as control group. And if the group is exposed to some novel or special conditions, it is called as experimental group. Okay, if the experimental hypothesis testing, when the group is exposed to the normal or usual conditions, it is called as control group. If it is being exposed, group is exposed to the novel or special conditions, then we call it as a experimental group. Okay, so these are the two definitions. Okay, and also in the book they are given an examples. Okay, so you please refer so that you can understand better. Because of the time limitations, okay, it may not be possible for me to give an example and explain. Okay, so during the, if you get the class, okay, the regular class in future, okay, I will clearly differentiate. Okay, and also because the uploading problem also I am facing, because if the length of the video becomes very big, okay, it may not be possible to upload the video to the YouTube. That's also another issue. So that's why I'm clearly explaining the definitions or the concept of the research design. Then comes to the treatments. So we use many times, these are all the terms which are being used in the research process. Okay, we should be familiar with all these concepts of the research design. The different conditions under which the experimental and the control groups are put under the usually they are referred as treatments. Okay, so that is nothing but we are putting the control groups and the conditions for the experiments, okay, for the special treatments, or the, we call it as the normal group, or the normal conditions and special conditions, they are called the treatments. Okay, in context of research designs, the normal control group and the experimental group. So these are all the two different conditions. So these conditions are called as treatments. Okay, once again I repeat, the different conditions under which the experimentals and control groups are put are termed as treatments. Okay, then come to the ninth concept, that is experiment. The process of examining the truth of the statistical hypothesis relating to the some research problem is known as experiment. Once again I repeat, okay, the process of examining the truth of the statistical hypothesis relating to the sum of the research problem is known as experiment. Okay, then 10th, the experimental unit. The predefined plots or the blocks where different treatments are used, known as experimental units. Okay, in detail we are discussing the experiments, treatments, and the control variables, dependent variables, research hypothesis, experimental units, okay, when subsequently move in this research design process. Okay, so you note down the questions to be answered. What is research design? Okay, what are the decision to be made while designing the research? Next question, what are the components of the research design? List and identify and discuss. Next point, list the important features of the research design, and identify and discuss the important features of the good research design. Good research design. Next question. What is the need of the research design? Next question. Identify and list and discuss the important concepts to be understood with respect to research design in the research process. Thank you. See you tomorrow.